Hey there, guys. I've been a huge Fast and Furious fan. You all know that. A few days back, I was seeing the original Fast and Furious movie myself, and that movie made me realize how different, or let's say how weird the Fast franchise has become over the years. Yes, today's video is going to be about that one Fast and Furious topic which many YouTubers have not made. Of course, it's a very popular fan theory, or let's say a very popular fan discussion topic. A lot of the people have been discussing this very frequently on online forums and on Twitter as well. This video is dedicated to that particular theory, which is a fan favorite, in my opinion. Hey there, guys, how's it going? This is John Matthew, and you're watching CineMania 24/7. You know, the channel that is dedicated to movies, music, physical media, books, video games, and pop culture. Yes, the Fast and the Furious movies are almost 2 decades old now, and the first movie came back in 2001, a film that was set about street racing and some local thugs stealing 18 wheelers in the middle of the night using their Japanese cars that are black in color, and there's an undercover cop trying to infiltrate their gang and trying to know more about them. There's the sense of loyalty, there are beautiful cars, likable characters, relatable characters, in fact, and also, very, very relatable and grounded sense of narration. The Fast and the Furious was actually supposed to be a one movie, a one single movie that will turn out to be a classic. Just let's say how The Fifth Element became. Let's just say how movies like, The Shawshank Redemption became. It was supposed to be something of that class. One single movie, no sequels, and one hell of a ride. But unfortunately, none of that took place because Universal somehow decided to extend the movies and make them into multiple number of sequels. And you guys know how Hollywood's track record has been with sequels over the years. The entire Fast and Furious franchise at this point has become an absurdity, a huge absurdity that is not even remotely relatable to what the characters were doing in the first movie. If anyone remembers the first movie very well, the characters are absolutely absurd, bonkers, and completely over the top now. You cannot even believe the stuff that they do in the recent films. Exactly. None of us can. Over the years, Dom and company have gone on to doing all kinds of crazy bullshit. I mean, there was a time when they were hijacking 18 wheelers, getting into mess with Asian drivers and fighting in race wars, driving Japanese cars in the middle of the night, getting scared of cops and running away. They were grounded people essentially. But right now, fast forward 20 years later, they are government agents. They can do every sort of mission impossible in James Bond stunt without an explanation as to where they get these activities. And after the movie 4, the entire franchise went bonkers. The entire franchise went bonkers, believe me. In my essential opinion, the movie Fast 5 is the very beginning of how Fast and Furious began to become more and more absurd over the years. Fast and Furious 4 to a certain degree was at least acceptable in terms of the fact that it still had this street racing plot inside it, and to a certain extent it did not have the, let's say, slightly darker tone that the first Fast and Furious movie had. This Fast and Furious film was far more darker than the last installments because it had the death of one of the central characters of that film, and since we are dealing with the death of a character, the franchise had to be incredibly dark. As you can see, that particular movie had to be very dark. Of course, a lot of the stuff were not handled correctly in that film. That's the reason it hasn't aged so well. But to me, Fast and Furious 4 was the only film that was actually almost completely about street racing and about the cops thing. There was no such film that ever existed after the Fast and Furious 4 film that had street racing into its main plot. These street racing elements sort of became a side, and they sort of graduated from street racing to being spies, international spies that can do every kind of stuff which no one can imagine. Of course, that is the reason why the entire franchise ended up being crappy. But there are many other reasons why I feel that the franchise ended up being far worse than what it is today. Another possible reason why I feel that Fast and Furious actually went away from street racing into some other territory is maybe because they wanted to evolve with time. A lot of the franchises have all evolved over the years and gone on to become either perfect versions or crappy versions of themselves. Well, perfect or crappy is completely subjective because my opinions don't really count, do they? Because whatever I say might be completely opposite for someone else, and I respect the opinion for that reason. That's why I say it's subjective. You might look at the Toy Story franchise as a very lucrative franchise, but I feel after 2, they kind of changed the entire narrative. They kind of, corrupted the narrative. 4 was an absolutely unnecessary film, in my opinion. Very, very unnecessary film. But they still made it and earned $1 billion. And that's very, very bankable IP for Disney, considering the kind of scene they are into now and the kind of bullshit that they've been crocking out for the last, 5, 6 years. I don't know what's happening to them anyway. But that probably explains that which time the Universal Pictures brand decided to make Fast and Furious into an evolving franchise. They wanted to involve cars in it only in order to get more money. Little did they ever understand that if the franchise was more about cars and racing, it would have been far more comprehensive and far more likable than what it is today. People would have loved it for an entire generation. It could have been the initial D for an entire generation. I mean, it could be placed second or let's say even close to initial D in some regard. They could have had more cars, they could have had more characters, more street racing based stories, somewhere with cops and drug money thrown into the blast. You could have had heists, you could have had some sort of cop kind of shit, you could have had some kind of murder mystery with cars involved into it. There could have been a lot of stories which could have pumped out from the Fast and Furious series if it did not go the James Bond and Mission Impossible route. But now the damage is done and we can't help it, can we? This goes for point number two, that maybe with time they wanted to evolve, which eventually killed the entire franchise, in my opinion. Now, this point really is absolutely controversial given the idea that a lot of people all over the world have been debating over this idea that whether Fast and Furious was about street racing or about racing or not. Well, let me tell you something. The first three movies had cars as the center of their entire plot. Everything that was happening in the movie, irrespective of whoever was doing it or why they were doing it with cars, and cars were the most important part of the entire film in general. The entire plot used to proceed because of cars for some reason. If you look at the first Fast and Furious movie, it is basically like some sort of a documentary for maybe your JDM cars. Of course, they're like documentaries for JDM cars. But if you look at, so sorry guys, I had to go back outside for some small reason, but coming back to the video, Fast and Furious was almost always about racing. It had street racing or let's say car racing in some or the other form. The entire identity of this franchise comes from the JDM cars that were actually popularized or let's say immortalized to this movie. JDM cars existing in the entire write up of this film is the very reason why this movie actually became such an iconic franchise in the entire people's minds. Even if you look at today, that is the number of replica cars that come out from all the parts of the world, it is only from the first movie itself and some parts from the second and the third movies as well. These three movies have essentially become one of the most iconic car culture based movies ever. Believe me, they might be factually incorrect, they might have problems, they might be sometimes going into the bizarre territory for a car guy, but still they managed to make these movies for every single person who is into cars. Fast and Furious practically catapulted an entire generation into cars, and these films were almost always included about racing in some or the other way. Though the first film was somewhat about an FBI agent or let's say a policeman, an LA cop who was trying to find out the hijackings by some street racing gangs apparently, but the majority of the time that he spent was only within these street racing gangs. That's the reason why, according to the screen time logic, I believe Fast and Furious, the first movie, was almost completely about street racing. The cops and the other part was totally secondary. Too Fast, Too Furious, on the other hand, might be a different film because that was the only movie that had, this James Bond kind of stuff where the villain is extremely powerful, as a big villa in a mansion, as a hot chick beside him. There are two guys that are trying to push everything beneath the gears in order to, get redemption for their lives, get immunity for all the crimes that they've done in the past. Tokyo Drift is basically an ultra simple movie where a new kid who gets into a new country, a new place, ends up screwing up with someone that he should not have, and how he's supposed to basically tackle life for himself and figure out things while also being a hot target for the Japanese Yakuza is the entire movie. Street racing was a very integral part for these three movies, and in some way it was helping the entire franchise to shape up, the entire set of events in the movies to shape up to what these films have actually become. I mean, if we didn't see that chase sequence in Tokyo Drift where Han is killed off, we would have never seen Sean and DK race off for one last time in order to, offer a peaceful solution for all the shit that they had been doing. If Brian had not taken help from his street racer friends, then that entire, cocaine or drug money heist would have been completely botched, and Brian and Roman would have lost their lives. If Brian would not have infiltrated Dom's gang in the first place. He would never exactly know how the, trucks were being hijacked and who was hijacking them. And if he never exactly knew, or let's say Dominic Toretto never exactly was in contact with Brian O'Connor, he would never exactly give him the 10-second car, the 10-second car that became a bond of a lifetime, both on screen and off screen. So this was the entire video about when Fast and Furious was about street racing, and I still believe that Fast and Furious was majorly about street racing. Its entire, story writing, its entire plot points were almost always based on street racing things. But once the franchise graduated into the absurd and bizarre territory, they totally forgot their roots, and that's the reason why the franchise sucks right now. Believe me, it's high time the audience also starts graduating into different car movies. There can be a new Fast and Furious movie for a new generation. There can be a new Initial D for a new generation. There can be a new JDM movie, a muscle car movie, a Euro car movie. It needs is good actors, a good script, believable characters, something that is relevant to 2020s, and also something that is nostalgic, that at least binds both the kinds of audience together, the old audience and the new audience. This is the video for the day, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for all the notifications. New videos will be coming up every now and then. My Super Nintendo video series is going to start very soon. Hope you like that, and also subscribe to that particular video series too. Till that time, guys, take care. Bye bye. Stay safe. Please keep buying movies on physical media. That's the best way you can preserve movies. Bye bye and Godspeed.